All right, everybody, let's go ahead and start whenever you are settled. Hope you're having a great day so far. We're so thankful that you're here. We are, for those of you that haven't been here, we are walking through a lot of the spiritual disciplines, and I haven't been here in 2 weeks because of Honduras, then COVID, but we just kind of finished up fasting. And I hope you fasted while we were gone. We kind of did a church-wide fast while our group was in Honduras on that Wednesday night. I don't know how many fasted. I was hoping for at least 2. Maybe we got 3. Who knows? All right, so we did, yeah. And then y'all came together and prayed for us, and we really appreciate that. And I hope that that has become a discipline in your life that will be a rhythm and a rule of life and be a normal part of your spiritual walk. Today we are moving on to a different one, and we're going to be talking about solitude. And solitude is one of those, they're all challenging, obviously, because they're disciplines. We have to discipline ourselves to do them. But solitude is one of those, I think, that truly benefits us, and is one of the ones that if we can put it into practice, it's going to help shape the other disciplines. It's kind of the container for a lot of the other disciplines. And so that's what we're jumping into now. And our Wednesday nights are going to be a little different because we got Camp Create coming up. And we'll be having a Camp Create work night this Wednesday and then Camp Create. So we won't really get to put this one into practice, at least as a community, until after camp. On January 27th, 1956, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he was sitting at his kitchen table in the middle of the night, and he was about to walk away from his destiny. He's about to walk away from the things that he was pursuing. It was still early on in the civil rights movement. Dr. King wasn't widely known yet, and he had been brought to Montgomery, Alabama to lead the bus boycott. Rosa Parks had already made her stance by sitting in the non-colored section of the bus, and Dr. King was brought in to kind of lead that boycott. Well, as time went on, with rising death threats and calls and all the pressure being put on Dr. King and others, they start to kind of turn on Dr. King. And he's overwhelmed by it. He doesn't really want to pursue this because even his own people are turning on him. The day before, Dr. King, he'd been arrested. He'd been jailed for driving 30 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. There's just a lot of pressure being put on him. That morning he was released. He came home to another round of threatening phone calls and another round of death threats. And then the evening of the 27th, January 27th, 1956, he could not fall asleep, so he got out of bed, he made a pot of coffee, he sat down in his kitchen, and he began to pray to God in the quiet. In a later sermon, here's what he said. He said, "I bowed down over that cup of coffee. I will never forget it. I prayed a prayer, and I prayed out loud that night. I said, Lord, I'm down here trying to do what's right, but Lord, I must confess that I'm weak now. I'm faltering. I'm losing my courage. And it seemed at that moment that I could hear an inner voice saying to me, Martin Luther, stand up for righteousness, stand up for justice, stand up for truth, and lo, I will be with you even to the end of the world." In his biography of Dr. King, David Lewis, he makes the point that this was the defining moment in Dr. King's life, and as a result, in the nation and far beyond. the influence that he had. But imagine a hypothetical situation here, okay? What if Dr. King had a smartphone? What if he sat down with his cup of coffee and he sort of just disappeared into Twitter, or worked on his latest TikTok video? Or what if he started reading the news and fuming over the latest op-ed? What if he had a TV with Netflix on it and he just decided, I just need to check out a minute, I'm overwhelmed right now, and I just binge watches a show in the middle of the night? What if? Would there have been a Dr. King? Would he have been able to understand God's leading in his life and discern God's will for his life in the quiet of that night? Would he have been able to draw upon God's strength to continue the fight that he was overwhelmed in? Or would he have been sucked into the black hole of the digital age, like we are a lot of times? It's a hypothetical situation, but what if? It's got me thinking about, our very real situation in which we live in. We're the first generation to apprentice under Jesus in a digital age. What if the greatest threat to Christianity today isn't secularism, but distraction? What if we're not putting these spiritual practices into play because we're distracted? It's not that we don't want to. It's not that we don't want to allow God's leading in our life. It's not that we don't want to draw nearer to Christ. We're just distracted, especially when it comes to solitude. We live in an era where it's possible to go through your entire life and never be alone. And even when we are alone, we're distracted. We're on our phone or on the internet. We're on our entertainment queue, whatever that may be. A cultural critic named Cal Newport, he wrote a book called Digital Minimalism, and this is what he says. He said, it's now possible to completely banish solitude from your life. It's the moment that most of us, we are alone. Maybe the only moments we're alone are in our room at night or even in our car. And those moments that we are alone, we reach for our device. We check our text, we open social media, we read the news, we play music, we put on a podcast, we do whatever. We have so many options. Our devices keep us tethered to the world of noise, and they keep us tethered to never being alone, even when we are alone. Do you find yourself struggling with this? That's why I think solitude is a challenging one. We may view it as an easy discipline. Oh, I can do that. But yet, we're in an age where we face distractions and temptations that a lot of people haven't faced up to this point in history. How many moments, and I'm speaking personally here, how many moments have I missed where God wanted to guide me or shape me, but I was too distracted in the midst of those quiet times, in the midst of those moments alone? Do you struggle with this? Why do you think we struggle with this so much? Even though we want to be with God, we want to be known by God and know Him more. Jay?
I'm not a digital guy, I know that, but
Right.
I think sometimes we use distraction as kind of an excuse, and I think it's more of a discipline issue, because with the same device, you can go to do research on things, blogs about Christianity and world missions, or all kind of things that are good.
Right, you can focus on God with that device.
But
Yeah.
what people tend to do is do things that don't take them down those roads.
Right.
I think it's more of a discipline issue, a lot more so than distraction.
Okay. What else? Yeah, Laura?
I say, well, that's true, but it's a choice. I mean, and it's not a substitute. I mean, you can say that all day long. Well, I listened to 2 hours of Christian music today, or man, I listened to the best podcast on whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a substitute for spending one-on-one,
Agree.
undistracted time with God. And that's true. That statement is true. But there are a lot of distractions, but I have to choose those distractions. And that's where, the rubber meets the road. It's like, it's a choice. And yeah, it's hard, but it is a personal choice. Are you gonna put aside time, just one-on-one? Are you gonna, and I'm so guilty of it. I mean, it's so easy to be distracted.
Right. Right. What else? Paul?
So, MLK, I think he was uncomfortable with where he was at the moment. That's why he did what he did. So the best thing he possibly knew to do would be to reach that uncomfortable stage and go to the place where he knew he could find
Strength and comfort.
company,
Mhm.
yeah, and strength and all that kind of, direction for what he needed to do. So I don't, they were distracted back then too.
Right.
It's just 90 times worse today.
Yeah.
It's tough to even seclude yourself, especially when you're provided energy from other people, like an extrovert
Mm-hmm.
would be. But I can handle seclusion for about a day, and then I'm out. I'm done. I want to be around people, because then anyway.
Yeah.
It's hard, but
That FOMO kicks in.
right.
Yeah.
I gotta be around, and I would also even challenge us a little bit, maybe I dare say this, but maybe the Bible could also be a distraction. Maybe
Oh,
it's
for
just
sure.
It's just
Okay.
time for us to be alone with God.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I'm saying the Bible is a bad thing, but there needs to be something outside of our relationship. Go out into nature, like you talk a lot about doing. Go on a hiking trail. Just go spend time in nature by yourself and wonder at God.
Absolutely, and that's exactly the practice we're about to look at. Amanda?
When Paul said, that MLK was at a really difficult point, and you talked about that, I think that kind of hits the nail on the head for we do have maybe more distractions or easier access to distractions now, but I think it comes down to kind of like what Jay was saying, the discipline, it's easier to not deal with the hard things. It's easier to distract ourselves from
Right.
those difficult moments, and I think that's something we learn as a child. I mean, it is easier to fill a void with something distracting, whether it's food, social media, whatever it might be, than to actually wrestle with the hard things in life. And I think that's an ancient, that probably goes back to the beginning of time. And so that discipline comes in where you say, through the help of the Spirit and with God, I'm going to face the hard things. But when you're in solitude, those things are loud.
Right.
The heavy things in life are loud when you are alone with God.
Right, and that's all true of all the spiritual disciplines we've talked about so far: Sabbath, prayer, fasting. It's easier, it's more comfortable not to do these things, right? It's more comfortable to eat. It's more comfortable to get things done and not discipline myself to stop and rest. It's more comfortable to not rely upon God, but to just handle it myself. All of these things. Justin and Wayne.
I've noticed sometimes whenever, and if you hunt or fish, or just hiking, whatever, the outdoors, you've probably been through the same thing where you spend any amount of time in solitude, away from every distraction. For me, it's whenever I go, hunting or on a hunting trip somewhere, no phones, no distractions, just walk in and everything's quiet. You don't hear any of the background noises. But I've been in those places before and know that there's not a phone anywhere inside. And even if there was, it wouldn't work. And here, think I hear something ring. And for me, it's programming.
Or you feel your leg buzz and there's no phone in your pocket. You ever had that happen? Yeah. It's like, what is happening?
And it comes down to programming. You
Yeah.
truly get used to these things and you don't even realize.
Right.
And then once you get out there, it takes a set amount of time to reprogram and kind of get back to zero. But the good news is that you can get back to that place and reprogrammed and you come back, unfortunately, to reality.
Yeah. I think everybody that went on Honduras had just had that experience a little bit.
Yes, and those things seem to be really loud.
Right. Wayne?
I think the talent or character, whatever you want to call it, being fully present for God, very important, but for each other, it's got so much worse. And, you know, I was in a restaurant at lunch Friday, and we've all seen this, but there was a table just across from me there. 6 people, adults and teenagers sitting there. And at one time, I looked over there, all 6 of them were on their phone. They weren't there present with each
Right.
other at that time. They're all on their phone.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that too. It's not even that we're not present in solitude. We're not present in community either. We'll talk about that for sure. Let me get your comment here in just a second, Richie. Let me get a little bit further and then I'll get your comment, okay? So Dr. King has tapped into one of the spiritual disciplines that we see in the life of Jesus, that Jesus regularly does. If you look at Luke 5, in verse 15 and 16, you see this. He says, the news about Jesus spread all the more so that crowds of people came to hear him, to be healed of their sicknesses. So you get a lot of vague, all-encompassing statements like this in the Bible. Jesus did way more than we even know, right? There's way more that happened than we have recorded. And then listen to what Luke says. He says, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Lonely places there, you can see the Greek up here. It's translated, it can be translated several ways. The desert, deserted places, the desolate place, or my favorite, the quiet place. So Jesus' world was it was different from our own here in Hot Springs. We're surrounded by people all the time. Anywhere you go in town, there's people everywhere. Back then, many people, they lived in small, rural villages. Most were farmers on little plots of land, all within walking distance to the synagogue. Now, outside of that was just vast stretches of desolate places. And this is where Jesus would go. This is where he would often retreat, to this uninhabited land. Jesus would regularly disappear out into these wide open spaces. Don't sing the song in your head, please. And he would do this to pray. He would draw away to pray. And Luke tells us he often withdrew to the quiet place. I love the Message translation of this. It says, as often as possible, Jesus withdrew to the out-of-the-way places for prayer. As often as possible. I like that thought. As much as he could get out there, Jesus was going out there. And when you read the Gospels, you find story after story of Jesus all alone, out in nature, just him and God. And so he's alone, but he's not alone. He's with God. Richie?
Okay.
Did I throw your comment?
No?
Okay.
We as Christians, whether you've been in the church all your life or you become a new Christian as an adult, we know that we have to go to a silent place. And it is important to us to do that.
Yeah.
Because we know what we get when we get there. We get to talk to Jesus, we get to talk to God. And that is so awesome to even think about that God listens to a sinner like me. And, that's what I was gonna say, was just, when you get there, you know what you get.
Yeah, and I think that's the draw even for Jesus. It's the reward of being with your Father. Even though he's always with you, it's really hard to focus upon him. So Jesus lived in this rhythm of retreat and return. Retreat and return.
He was busy.
Right.
He was occupied, and he was.
Oh, for sure.
We were all the same thing, that he had to go to a quiet place.
Yeah, he would retreat to get away from the noise, to get away from people, to get away from stimulation, to pray, listen, rest, and be with his Father. But he was no hermit. Some people take this spiritual discipline and they it's all they do. They kind of exclude themselves from community. They love the retreat so much that they never come back. There's never a return. Jesus would then return to be with people in community and to love and to serve and to heal and to do all the amazing things he did. And so you see Jesus toggle back and forth between solitude and community. There are all sorts of ways to group the practices of Jesus or the spiritual disciplines, but arguably solitude and community are the two basic containers for all the practices. It's in these spaces where the practices play out. The problem is many of us in our age never really go all the way into solitude, and we never really go all the way into community. Right? Like we'll dip our toes in solitude, but then we get distracted. We definitely don't make it a rhythm. And we'll dip our toes in community, but we never really get involved in community. We like the idea, but the practice is a whole nother matter. Instead, we're often alone together. As one MIT professor said, she said that we are together, but we're alone in the midst of our togetherness. So you can be with people, but not actually in community. And never have relationships go beneath the surface where you are known and where you know others. And you can be alone in a room, but actually not alone. You're on your device. You're tethered to the noise. And so we're drawn to solitude like we're drawn to community, but we're also scared of it. Which is why your mind probably raises some objections here to this practice. You say, yeah, but I'm an extrovert. See, Paul's already brought it up. Or yeah, I'm a young parent. Boo. Have you ever tried to be in solitude with young kids? Yes, I have. I know how extremely difficult that is. Or I live a busy life. Or what about social justice and mission? But your excuses fall short because Jesus lived in this rhythm. Jesus often withdrew to the quiet place. And I mean, he was Jesus. Like, he literally had people clinging to him, coming from hundreds of miles away to just be healed by him. Lines and lines and lines of people wanting to be fed by him, wanting him to perform a miracle. People digging through ceilings just to get their friends to him. And people begging from the roadside for his touch. And yet, in spite of all that demand and in spite of all that noise, he lived in this rhythm of retreat and return. In fact, you can chart Jesus' life on an axis of demand and withdrawal. It seems that the more in demand that Jesus became, the more that he withdrew to the quiet place, is how it seems when you read through the life of Christ. And so we read stories of people literally going out and searching for him in the quiet place or in the desert. And in doing so, he laid down for all of his apprentices a pattern to follow. This is the rhythm. He even tells his disciples, you need to go be alone for a little bit. You're just doing too much. So let's start by talking about what solitude is not. Go ahead, Jake.
I was going to say, I could be shooting from the hip and totally wrong, but the Greek word hepter reminds me of arena, which is peace.
All right.
And it's kind of like shalom, that peace is not the absence of conflict or the absence of
Right.
noise or whatever. That it seems that Jesus is going to places where he removes himself from activity to be at peace with God's relationship kind of turn on, to be able to be at peace in the community. So it's almost like it's kind of a relational idea that we're at peace when we're alone and it's quiet, and we're at peace in the midst of community and noise and everything. It's kind of a relationship that joining with God in those places allows you to be at peace when all the activity's kind of going crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're spot on. So let's talk about what solitude is not. First, it's not loneliness. Richard Foster, in The Celebration of Discipline, he writes, loneliness is inner emptiness. Solitude is inner fulfillment. So loneliness is not solitude, right? Loneliness is a felt absence, but solitude is a felt presence. And so you can say, like, well, Boo, I spend time alone, but maybe you're lonely. You're not actually practicing the spiritual discipline of solitude. Solitude is spending time alone to be filled by Yahweh. Second, it's not isolation. Wayne Cordero, he writes this, he says, there's a difference between isolation and solitude. They contain similar characteristics, but in reality, they're worlds apart. Solitude is a chosen separation for refining your soul. Isolation is what you crave when you neglect the first. Isn't that a great statement? So when you neglect solitude, what you find is isolation. And so you're withdrawing just to not be around people, but you're not withdrawing for the right reasons. Isolation is a movement away from relationship. Solitude is a movement toward relationship. This retreat is a way to be strengthened in order to go back to community. So it's not loneliness, it's not isolation, and it's not aloneness. When social scientists, they study the effect of solitude on the human person, they distinguish between solitude and aloneness. Aloneness is what we introverts love. Paul's an extrovert, I'm an introvert. Introverts love to be alone, and if you allow us to be, we will never see people again, and we would be completely excited about that, you know. But that's not good, is it? Just like it's not good for an extrovert to be with people all the time. And so there's a difference between, I just need to get away and be alone, and this retreat and return. There's a crucial distinction because many people mistakenly assume that solitude is a preference-based spiritual discipline for introverts. Nothing could be further from the truth. And this is a tragedy for extroverts because they never experience the depth of intimacy with God that is possible only in the quiet place. In reality, studies show that once you distinguish between solitude and aloneness, introverts have no higher desire for or enjoyment of solitude than extroverts. Once you make that distinction. So what is it? What is solitude? Well, let's kind of talk about it. Very simply, the practice of solitude is intentional quiet time with ourselves and God. That's what it is. Ruth Haley Barton, fantastic author. If you ever want to read her books, they're outstanding. She says that solitude at its most basic and profound level is simply an opportunity to be ourselves with God. I love that. Like it's just an opportunity for me to be open, honest, vulnerable before God. I'm not going to be alone for the sake of being alone. I'm going to be with God for the reward of being with God. That's why it's not the same thing as aloneness. You're not alone. You're alone with God. In the 4th century, St. Jerome, he said this. He said, we are never less alone than when alone. We're never less alone than when alone. One way to think about solitude is a place that is free of inputs. It's free of distraction. It's free of noise. It's simply your heart and God's heart. The only inputs are God and your heart laid open before God. Why would we not want that? Introvert, extrovert, doesn't matter. Why would we not want that? What do you think? Why do we fight against it? See, I get fasting, and I get why you wouldn't want to fast. I understand that. Why would you not want to make solitude a rhythm in your life? Amanda and Paul.
I really don't, maybe it's just personal, but I really don't think it's a matter of desire. Like when you lay it out that way, of course we want that. I think it goes back to the discipline. Like when you listed those things, you know, just, I think in different seasons of life, sometimes it's more difficult than others. Like when you do have small children or when you know, I think that it's not maybe a desire problem. Or if it is a desire problem, it might be a heart problem. If we don't want to spend time alone with God, then we need to probably pray about the condition of our hearts.
But you're not going to because you're not going to pray.
Well, I think it's more of it is hard to discipline. Discipline is just hard. It's hard to, like, you know, Jesus prioritized it when he was, you know, doing, I don't know, we look at the things Jesus did. It's crazy to me that word often, or I think
it's a true test of how dependent upon him you are,
Right.
just as Sabbath is.
Yes.
Right? Like if you can't stop and rest, you've got to be working, achieving, getting to the next point in your success or your life. It's a tell of I'm not really dependent upon him, or I am, I just don't recognize it. And it's true of solitude, prayer, fasting as well. It's all true of all of them. Do I find value in it or not? Do I feel like it's a waste of time? Chad?
Going back to your question, I think, I'll speak for myself, I don't know if anybody would ever want to say it or whatever, but up until probably years ago, I wouldn't have wanted to do this because I didn't really truthfully believe that God would want to talk back, could do all these things. It's honestly like the Holy Ghost type thing. You hear it, you hear the sermons, you're grown up, but you really believe it. And I mean like 100% believe it, not like, yeah, that could happen, but like it is going to happen. And I don't think people want to do solitude because they think I'm just going to go do this solitude discipline and I'm not going to hear an answer or get some sort of result that I want or something like that. And like you know, 10 years ago, you could have read that Martin Luther King statement and I would have said, well, he was hearing something, that's not probably going to happen. But since it's happened to me before, it's like, I know it can happen. And I honestly think people want to do solitude to that. That's what I believe. I don't think it's because you don't have time.
Yeah.
We all know we have time. Jesus had time. He was famous, so he really needed to get away.
Right.
We got to remember that. He was like Taylor Swift to them, in a way. And so but you know what I'm saying? Like,
Don't ever compare
he's
Jesus.
got to get away. Well, we always want to put him as like this, like just healer, but he
Yeah.
was super uber famous.
Yeah.
These people were talking about him all over this area. Anyway, I just think that people don't believe it personally.
Yeah, or we think that God's going to do what God's going to do, his guidance, his direction, his discernment in our lives. It's just going to happen whether we pause and listen to him or not, potentially. I don't know. Eric, and then Jay.
We also live in a culture of instant gratification, where
For sure.
the things on your phone, like TikTok, YouTube, mobile games, whatever, is designed to give you that, serotonin and endorphin release in
Right.
your brain to make you feel good, versus, it's a long game when you're in solitude. You're not doing solitude, for the selfish benefit. It's to have a close relationship with God. But when it comes down to it, and you have time for either one, a lot of the times we gravitate towards, I'm going to get instant gratification from something on my phone, video games, or whatever. And I think in today's culture, it pulls us that way instead of towards God.
Right. Like, I fully expect that I could go run a half marathon and only train one time. Like, I just feel like I could do that because it's kind of that instant gratification thing. I'll go run 3 miles and then I can run a half marathon. When the truth is that's not going to happen. It's just simply not going to happen. Jay.
I was just gonna say that I think another reason we don't wanna do solitude is because we don't wanna give up control. We like control, we crave control, we love control.
Absolutely. Yeah, control has a lot to do with all of it.
And this can be experienced in the midst of chaos and crowd and all that.
Yeah, I agree, but I do think the practice is important.
The actual discipline of moving yourself away for that purpose, I think, is important. But you can get to that stage where it becomes, as discipline, in the midst of a crowd of people that are hounding you,
Yeah,
you know.
right. A lot of times people are like, "Boo, you with me?" I'm like, "Nope, no, not here."
What were you saying?
Because there's two things I want to show you. Not the song. No, we're not singing the song. Two things that are, when you think about what solitude is, we define what it's not. Two things that it is it's silence. And that's exterior silence, that's interior silence. Let me silence my mind of all the things I have to do, what's going on. Obviously, you need to have that exterior silence. And then stillness. It's you ever seen somebody with restless leg syndrome? My word, if I sit next to somebody that does that, I just want to grab their leg. Please be still. It's still. It's calming your body, calming your mind. That stillness before God. It's simply be still. And and I will reveal myself to you. Right, Laura?
I say, without solitude, we practice a lot of casual Christianity. Like, I pray on the way to work.
Yeah.
I get it done. I get it done. But just like you said, the solitude is where you actually invite God into it.
It's
You sit
intentional.
there and
Yeah.
wait and listen.
Mhm.
And I can't do that anywhere else except alone,
Out.
quiet.
Right.
Yeah, and even outside, out on my porch a lot, and I even get distracted by many things out there. Dog is, chewing my shoes down here, something, a deer comes across.
Yeah, I need to work on that. I need to
Right,
work
so-
on this.
Or all of a sudden I'm going, what am I thinking? I'm just not even here. But if you really are very intentional about it, it's kind of like the fasting thing. Until you've gone there, like Chad said, until you've gone there and really experienced it, you have no idea what you're missing
Right.
not going there.
Right. Amanda?
I think it's important too to remember, like I was just thinking about, Paul going and spending time in the wilderness, when Saul became Paul, and then I was thinking about Jesus, going to the wilderness to be tempted, but I think it makes me think that Satan, just like he was, tempting Jesus when he was in solitude, he is gonna take those moments
Oh, for sure.
to tempt us as well. And I think it's amazing that we have the example of Jesus, spending 40 days in solitude with the Lord, but being tempted by Satan and overcoming that temptation. I think obviously that wasn't the only. I think that part of the temptation was to the distraction of Satan and the distraction of not remaining with God and being with him. I think it's
Yeah.
it's easy to, or it's not easy, but like once we do find time and discipline for that solitude, Paul was talking about intrusive thoughts. I think Satan takes those opportunities as well to distract us or tempt us or whatever.
Yeah, and you think about, and I've talked about this several times, but you think about what Jesus was tempted with. It was his identity
Yeah.
and God's provision for him. Are you the Son of God? If you are the Son of God, then tell these stones to become bread. Like, if you are who God just proclaimed that you are, then do this. And so it's this, does God provide for me? Or do I need to rely upon my own strength? You see how these tie together? Do I need to rely upon, is this valuable for me to spend time alone with him? Well, the temptation is it? Is that what God said? It's the same lie over and over and over throughout it. Is that who God claims you are? Are you valuable? Are you a child of his? Are you sure? Because he called you out here? Because the Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness. And so, did he really bring you out here to kill you? Does that sound like anybody else? The Israelites, did you really lead us out here just to kill us? It's like, do you truly trust in him and his provision? Bridget, and guess.
I think I have more of a question. So when you're in solitude, where's your mind supposed to be? Are you supposed to just let your mind be guided by what comes, or are you supposed to be in prayer that whole time?
When you and Timbo are spending time alone, working on your relationship, where's your mind?
Whatever we're talking about.
Whatever you're talking about. Your mind's on him and your relationship with him. No relationship any relationship that's valuable requires time alone with the other person.
So it's just like looking at yourself and things that you want to improve on, things you know, things that he's done for you.
I think it's for me, it's looking at him, one, in awe and amazement. And it's me reminding myself of his provision and his grace, and him reminding me of what he's doing in my life, and that he's with me. And all of these back and forth things. Anytime Amanda and I need to spend time alone and talk, it's a reminder in a lot of ways of, hey, I love you, and you love me, I know that. We've distanced ourselves a minute, and we need to come back together. A lot of times that's what it is for us. Now, the more we spend time together, the healthier that relationship is. And then it's not so much we've been distant, it's just, then it's rewarding of, I love spending time with you. Yes, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I think when I think of solitude, I think about the story. Like to me, it's rejuvenation. Taking the time to kind of make that connection is inspiring and motivating. It's really difficult to lean upon people that that you trust and have confidence in whenever they're kind of the 5-gallon bucket with all the holes in it. You're trying to fill it up, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to spend time doing this with the Lord if you ever want to bring people to Christ. Because if you're continuing to fill up that bucket that's got holes in it, you're just depleting every bit of
For sure.
spiritual energy that you have. And so
Yeah, your ministry will not be successful without this. Jesus' ministry, he even found time to do this. We can't imagine, I can't imagine trying to do it without this. Let me read one quote, Amanda, then you can bring us home, okay? Henry Nouwen, he said this. He said, without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside some time to be with God and to listen to him. Your relationship to God and to your own soul require this of you. It's absolutely a necessity, and I fully believe that. Amanda, bring us home.
Well, I just was thinking about Bridget's question because I struggle to calm my mind or to focus. And so to me, like, being in the Word is part of solitude. Like, being alone and reading, like, praying the Psalms. Or, like, I think it's okay to have guidance. And so I just wanted to respond to that because
Yeah.
I struggle with that too. And I think, when you talked about, like, Haggai over the Scripture, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Amanda told me, don't ever growl in the microphone.
No, but I think even if it's just, one section of scripture or looking for like something that we love about God and just, I think sometimes in solitude have to have guidance. Like otherwise I'm just, it's so easy for my mind to wander. And so I think being in the Word, and I think that all these disciplines go hand in hand: fasting, solitude, Sabbath, all those things. And so I think there's nothing wrong with having guidance in our solitude. Like, I think that's a good practice.
Yes.
Not just, being alone with our thoughts.
Excellent. And the sermons on that today, we're going to talk about Psalm 1 a little bit again. It's more an asking questions of the text. But I'll explain that when it comes to that time. I'm not going to get into that now. All right, we love you. There's coffee and donuts for those of you that don't know. There's more than enough. Go get you a coffee and a donut and chill out for a little bit.